When somebody does you wrong, what does the world tell you to do? Typically, the message of the world would say, get revenge, pay them back, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. That's the way of the world. But what that does is lead you down an endless cycle of revenge, retaliation, and death. And we see what that leads to in all kinds of painful, horrible historical situations, like we saw in Rwanda in the 90s, in Bosnia after the fall of Yugoslavia, or between the Israelis and the Palestinians in the Holy Land, or between Shiites and Sunnis in many countries, or between rival gangs or different cartels. That's the way of the world, but that's not the way of Jesus. His way is completely different. And Jesus teaches us in the gospel today that you need to be the one to break the cycle of revenge with love. When somebody doesn't love you or is hostile to you or does you wrong, what's the Christian response? You choose to love them anyway. You intentionally, proactively pursue what is good for them. You bless them and you pray for them. And that's the way that God changes human hearts. We see that same strategy in the first reading of the Mass today. This passage takes place about 1000 BC. And at the time, Saul is king. And David is an excellent young warrior. And at a certain point, Saul decides he wants to kill David because he considers David to be a threat. So Saul is hunting down David to try to kill him. And 2 times, David actually has a chance to kill Saul, but he holds back. He could take revenge, but he doesn't. Out of respect for his opponent Saul, he spares his life. And because of that strategy that's used by David, Saul experiences a change of heart toward him. God himself uses the same strategy in the history of salvation. Humanity had turned away from God and had offended God. And what did God do? God didn't seek revenge. In his great love for us, God sent us his Son Jesus, not to punish, not to take revenge, but to love us, and even to love us to the point of sacrificing his life for us on the cross. That's the way of God. When Jesus was hanging there on the cross, having been nailed there, having been tortured, what did he say? He said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Jesus changed human history through the power of love. And in today's gospel, from Luke chapter 6, Jesus says, "Love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you, and pray for those who mistreat you." Another beautiful example of this Christian teaching comes from Paul's 12th chapter of his letter to the Romans, where Paul says, "Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good." Never try to get revenge. That's in Romans chapter 12. And also remember the tremendous example that was given to us by Pope St. John Paul II after he had been shot at close range by his attempted assassin, Mehmet Ali Achka. What did John Paul II do? He went to visit him in jail, and he forgave him. Let me give you one more example, a powerful example of Christians who used the strategy of love to change human history. Back in 1998, I met a woman whose name was Norma McCorvey. She was the one who used the name Jane Roe in the 1973 Roe v. Wade Supreme Court case that legalized abortion in all 50 states. She ended up working at 3 different abortion clinics. She became a national spokesperson for the abortion industry. A lot of harm was done, and millions of innocent lives were lost through her efforts. And then there was this group of Christians who went to pray every day at an abortion clinic where she worked. Those people didn't treat Norma with anger or hatred or self-righteousness. Instead, what they did was they showed up every day and they prayed for her, and they showered her with love day after day. And in that group, there was a little 7-year-old girl whose name was Emily. And one day, Emily said something to Norma that was very impactful. She said in her little 7-year-old voice, "I love you, Miss Norma." And those words made a profound impact on Norma McCorvey. Later, Norma McCorvey wrote a book. It was her autobiography, and the title of that book is Won by Love. And I'd like to share with you some of her own words that she wrote about that period in her life and the change that happened in her. She writes this: "Something strange was happening inside me. I closed my eyes to shut everything out, but all I could see was Emily's face with her crinkled nose, and all I could hear was her sing-song voice. 'I love you, Miss Norma.' In truth, though at the time I didn't know it, I was being won by love. I could handle the hatred when people yelled at me and called me a murderer and a wicked witch. That didn't affect me. But the love in Rhonda's face and the love pouring out of Emily's voice, well, that love just about ripped me apart." The heart of Jane Roe was changed by a strategy of love. She became a pro-life advocate. In fact, I met her after she had had this change of heart. She went through a tremendous conversion. She ended up becoming a Catholic and committing her life to defending the life of the unborn. She turned away from the culture of death and became an active agent of the culture of life. And why? Because a few Christian people decided to love her. And today, Jesus challenges us to use the strategy of love, trusting in the power of God's grace to change the situation, in the power of truth to prevail, in the power of conscience to convert, and in the power of love to move human hearts. That's the way of Jesus, and that's the strategy that will change the world.